Alrighty, guys, there have been a lot of movies coming out in December, and I haven't had the chance to talk about all of them, unfortunately, just limited time, but I was able to check out one of the latest films to come out here from Disney, and that is Mufasa the Lion King, the live-action, quote-unquote, really animated prequel film to the 2019, again, quote-unquote, live-action animated, really, remake, rather, not adaptation, but remake of the original classic in the 90s, The Lion King. And so this is the prequel directed by Barry Jenkins, who, if you recall, is the director of the Best Picture winning Moonlight, the correct Best Picture winning Moonlight over La La Land. And yeah, Barry Jenkins is directing this, and it's a prequel about Mufasa and how he, well, became the Lion King. And, not to spoil this, because we are going to be doing a non-spoiler and then a spoiler discussion. So, if you have not seen the film, no worries. We are going to start out here with a non-spoiler discussion, and then I will clearly delineate when these spoilers will begin, and we'll go from there. So, guys, if you haven't seen The Lion King, no worries, and then I'll let you know when the spoilers begin. So, let's talk about Mufasa the Lion King. First of all, as I always like to do with my reviews, just to give you a sense of where I'm coming from, because I always believe that when you're listening to a review, the most important thing is not really the prestige or the accolades of the reviewer necessarily, although, if you're listening to a very well-renowned reviewer, that's always a good thing, but I always think it's a good thing to hear where the reviewer is coming from, because I think that the most important thing you can do when listening to a review is know, okay, maybe I align with the reviewer and my tastes and whatnot, and I understand where this person is coming from, so then I can align where I'm probably going to be coming from to decide whether I want to see this movie or show. Anyways, that's why I give context, because I think it's important. So, the 2019 version of Lion King, saw it in theaters. And first of all, I always say this because it's true. I didn't grow up a Disney animation kid. I grew up a Pixar kid. So I'm sure I watched almost all of the classic Disney animation films. Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, Mulan, Pocahontas, Snow White, Cinderella. I'm sure I watched all of them, right? But I didn't have those formative nostalgic memories of those films like some of my other friends did who grew up around that time. Instead, I have those, nostalgic formative memories for films like Finding Nemo and Toy Story and Monsters Inc. and Ratatouille, etc. So those are kind of my films. So I went into 2019's The Lion King, just curious because, again, I love The Lion King. It's a great movie. Just didn't have that nostalgia for it, but wanted to see how they were able to pull it off, especially because I loved 2016's The Jungle Book, the remake of The Jungle Book. That's an animated movie I had zero nostalgia for. I had seen it maybe once and didn't really like it that much, but I came out of 2016's The Jungle Book, directed by Jon Favreau as well. I loved it. I was so impressed at how they were able to take this story and bring it to life, quote unquote, even though, yes, it's almost all animated except for the character of Mowgli, right? And I thought, okay, if Jon Favreau is going to do Lion King and he's going to make it in the same style, I'm so on board. I came out of that movie, I remember this, and I said, it's good. Because honestly, if you're remaking one of the best animated, stories of all time, how much worse could it possibly be? And I say that facetiously, I'm sure that they could have made a very bad movie just following the exact same steps of the animated film. But, in all honesty, right? If you're following that same exact story, and they pretty much did, I don't think they deviated from it almost at all. Some of the other live-action remakes deviate a little bit here and there, some more than others, but Lion King, no. Lion King was basically just following the exact same steps in the animated film. And I said, look, how much worse could it be? So it's good. But there was something that felt a little off, right? It felt almost a little lifeless. And I don't know what it is about Jungle Book, and honestly, I could not give you a technical answer. I could not give you a film critic or film reviewer or film pundit answer. Somehow the animation of the animals in the Jungle Book look more real. And real, by real, I mean just look more believable is what I should say. The animation, it's almost paradoxical, but the animation in The Lion King, 2019's The Lion King, was almost too photorealistic that I just could not get on board with the characters and what they were doing. It was almost easier to close your eyes and listen to the characters talking, and you can almost imagine the animated version of The Lion King with just different voices, and you're like, oh yeah, that's what's going on. You open your eyes and you're like, what am I watching? But again, not bad. I enjoyed the movie. I enjoyed my experience. It just felt kind of empty, And so I went into this film. This is now 2024, Mufasa the Lion King. First of all, one would assume that a director like Barry Jenkins, is going to jump on projects that he really wants to do. He is the director of one of the more recent Best Picture winners, right? So you would think you'd be excited because it's Barry Jenkins. And then on top of that, the story looks good. Lin-Manuel Miranda is doing the music. He did this music instead of Moana 2. That's exciting. So I went into this with some cautious optimism, especially given some of the more positive reviews that this film had gotten. Although by the time I had, sat in my chair, the film had landed at about a 60% on Rotten Tomatoes. And so I was like, okay, we'll see. And here's what I will say about Mufasa, the Lion King. However you feel about 2019's the live action Lion King, I don't think, I would be willing to bet that for 95% of people who go into Mufasa the Lion King, having seen 2019's The Lion King, I don't think the range of how you feel about this movie is going to deviate, and by this movie I mean Mufasa the Lion King, how you feel about Mufasa is going to deviate too much from how you felt about 2019's The Lion King. That's my experience as well. I think this movie is good. I think it's all right, is what I would say. And there are a few things here. First of all, the same issue that I had with the CGI of the 2019 Lion King is still here. I feel like this would be a better movie if I just kind of closed my eyes and pretended I was watching an animated movie instead and just listening to the characters talk. Because when you open your eyes, there is just some kind of disconnect going on in terms of my brain. Perhaps it's different for you, and if it is, that's awesome. And you probably really liked the 2019 Lion King, and I liked it more than me, and you probably will like Mufasa the Lion King a little bit more than I will as well. That's great. But for me, as I'm watching this movie, there's just a bit of a disconnect there for me to be able to relate to the characters. Because I think the story is actually interesting in certain parts, although I will say the first little chunk dragged on a little bit for me, and then it kind of picked up steam as it went along, and there were some things here and there that I was like, oh, that was a little bit of a jump here, and you kind of just have to go with it. I think it's similar for other animated films as well, so I'm not saying it's exclusive to Mufasa the Lion King, but I think, for example, I think that, and again, not going into any spoilers, but I think the story arcs for some of the characters are stronger than others. And I'm not going to say who, and I'm not going to say why, but I think that there are, some, especially one character in particular, I was like, okay, by the end of the film, I get it. I think that there was actually a real, journey that this character went on. A couple other characters, I was like, well, it's cool, because you kind of, and that's the thing with prequels, right? For me, prequels have a ceiling, because prequels, especially prequels that are so close in time to the original. And yes, I know Mufasa is not, not a spoiler. I mean, you can see it in the trailers if you, so I hope this isn't a spoiler. But anyways, the Mufasa in this movie is not, that close to the Mufasa in age in The Lion King. He's much younger. But still, I mean, by close, I mean relatively close, right? Because you're seeing the trajectory from how you get from this young Mufasa to the James Earl Jones Mufasa, right? Rest in peace, by the way. It's really, kind of fitting that this movie came out this year. But anyways, yeah, so it's like you're seeing how close these two things can line up together. And with prequels like that, it's interesting because where a lot of things have to end up. So at a certain point in the movie, you always find yourself going, okay, so how are they going to get there? How are they going to get there? Oh, that thing happened, so that's why that's that thing. Okay. And it feels almost like you're checking boxes off, on a list. And so I think prequels in that sense have a ceiling. Now, that ceiling is not always low. I think that, you can make pretty good prequels, especially in that vein, but it's just kind of hard, right? It's just kind of hard when you're telling a story when every single character, especially. Like, it's a little different maybe with The Hobbit, for example, because you don't know what happens to the dwarves and whatnot, but unless you read The Lord of the Rings and all the other books and stuff like that. But I mean, for this story, it's like it's Mufasa and it's Taka, and Taka, I guess this is a spoiler, kind of. I'm sure you know who Taka is, but just in case you don't, that's a character that also ends up in The Lion King and other characters from The Lion King that you see in the trailer. So, again, it's just you kind of know where you're going. So in that way, prequels have a ceiling, and I think this movie had a ceiling as well. And then on top of that, I think there were some interesting choices made with pacing in terms of the structure of the film. There's one thing that they do with the structure of this film that at the beginning I was like, oh, this is fun. I kind of like this. By the halfway point, I was like getting a little old that you're doing this, and then by the end of the movie, I was like, I'm over it. I don't think we needed to do this. I get why in an odd way, but I think we didn't have to do this at all. And so there was that. So I think pacing was a little choppy, but I think the overall story was interesting enough. And like I said, by the time the movie ended, I was like, okay, I can see why some characters were, it would have been interesting to tell this story in a way to kind of show where characters came from, especially with one character in particular. Now, with the voice cast, I think that the voice cast is really solid. The actor, but I think it's Aaron Pierre who plays Mufasa, who is going to be the Jon Stewart of the DCU. Pretty exciting. I think he does a good job as Mufasa. I don't remember the actor's name who plays Taka, but I think he also does, I think he does a great job. And the other characters, again, not to spoil too many of them, but I think they all do a fine job here, and really nothing to stand out. The other thing, though, speaking of voices, that I did want to talk about before we transition to spoilers and I give my final thoughts in the non-spoiler review, is the music. Now, when you have a movie with Lin-Manuel Miranda, and especially you have a movie with Lin-Manuel Miranda, right after he did not do Moana 2. So you're kind of like, okay, you know, he's doing Mufasa the Lion King, and he didn't do Moana 2. Let's see what he's got up his sleeve that he was so excited about. And I'm going to be completely honest, because I love the music in Moana. Really like a lot of Lin-Manuel's music, and I think that he's, again, so talented, so talented. The music's fine. It's not great, honestly. It's just totally fine in this movie. And maybe I have to listen to the soundtrack a couple more times, but honestly, the music is just fine. And I was a little disappointed by that, because that's kind of the ceiling of this movie. The ceiling of this movie is that, in some parts you're like, oh, cool. And then the rest of it, you're like, yeah, it's fine. Again, towards the beginning, it dragged a little bit. The middle was interesting, and then the ending got a little more interesting. But by the time the movie ended, I was like, huh, okay, I saw that, and I guess I understand certain things now. But at the end of the day, I was like, yeah, I saw Mufasa the Lion King, and I think that's about all I have to say about that. So again, I don't think it's a bad movie, and like I said at the very beginning, I think this is true. However much you liked 2019's The Lion King, rather, that's about like the range of disliking compared to The Lion King and liking it more compared to The Lion King is not going to be that big. I can't imagine it's going to be that big. I think that if you really loved The Lion King, you're probably going to really like this movie, and if you really hated that Lion King, I don't think you're going to like this movie very much either. So those are my non-spoiler thoughts for Mufasa the Lion King, and we're going to transition now into the spoiler section. Just a few things I wanted to touch on here before we head on out. So if you haven't seen Mufasa the Lion King, just make sure to save this segment for later and come back to it once you have. And if you have, or if you just don't care about spoilers, welcome. Let's get into it. So the pacing thing that I wanted to address, that I was talking about in the non-spoiler review, is the whole switching back to the present timeline with, Donald Glover and Beyonce and young Kiara is the daughter of Simba and Nala. I'm getting all these names mixed up now because I just watched the whole movie with Mufasa and Taka, and now I'm like Simba, Nala, all these names. Anyways, but yes, so we have this present day timeline, and I get it, right? Because I'm sure Barry Jenkins really wanted to end the movie with the whole Mufasa's face in the sky and young Kiara kind of being like, oh, it's the passing of the torch and don't be afraid. But I'm not gonna lie, every time they cut back to them, every single time I was like, okay, can we move on? And the more it went on, the progressively more annoyed I got with that sequence, because it became just such a gag towards the middle part where it was just Pumbaa and Timon just being like, making jokes and just hanging out there. And I was like, okay, but can we get back to the story? Can we get back to the story? And every time they interjected with that, I was like, can we move on? Nothing against Billy Eichner or Seth Rogen. I think that in 2019's Lion King, they were cast great. I thought that they were great. And I liked them a lot as these roles. It just kind of felt like the story was halting every single time. The other thing I wanted to really touch on here is Scar, because I think the arc for Mufasa is good. And, it's a character who is pretty noble, and there's some interesting things they do here about family and about how, bloodlines don't really mean your royalty, and you can be a leader and you can be a ruler. And I think for what it's worth, there's a nice lesson there to be had. I did think they skipped through a lot of that stuff pretty quickly, honestly. I think that a lot of it is like, at the beginning especially, he loses his mother and father, and he just kind of, it feels very quick that happens and all that kind of stuff. But the character of Scar, I think they did a great job with in this movie. There's some almost biblical kind of allegories going on here when, in the middle, he kind of turns into a Judas figure and betrays Mufasa to Mads Mikkelsen's lion, who I can't remember his name, but it was Mads Mikkelsen. I didn't remember that Mads Mikkelsen was the villain, but as soon as the lion opened his mouth, I was like, oh, it's Mads Mikkelsen. Anyways, distinctive voice, very distinctive voice. But I think that Scar's character was super interesting, and I loved how the voice actor for Scar, again, apologies, I don't remember his name, but I love how at the beginning, he kind of had this annoying, whiny kid voice, teen voice, was just kind of happy-go-lucky, but also very, I think, scared and frightened at certain points and all that kind of stuff. And then as the inferiority complex grew, that voice morphed into Scar. And I was kind of taken aback. I was like, oh, wow, that this actor was able to do that so well, because by the end of the movie, that's Scar. That is totally Scar. And I was like, how are we going to get this guy Taka to become Scar? Totally did it. And I love how they were playing off of that whole inferiority complex here, where, Mads Mikkelsen's lion is totally playing into that. And he's all like, okay, I see that Mufasa, this kid who didn't belong into my family and I was supposed to get everything, took everything away from me. And I love how at the end it's like, hey, Like he turns into the Scar that we know at the beginning of The Lion King, where it's like, well, I guess I'm just hanging out here, but I despise my brother, I despise Mufasa. And they're not real brothers, but, that's the whole point of the movie is what is a brother, right? And I think that was all done really well. In terms of the Sarabi and, Zazu and Rafiki, it's all fine. Rafiki was cute and whatnot. Again, I think that this movie really was a prime example of, did we need to make this? No. And that's a little disappointing because it's Barry Jenkins who was behind it, and you kind of felt like there should be a reason that Barry Jenkins would want to make a movie like this, and I'm sure he has a great reason for it. I just don't know it, because at the end of the day, I watched this movie and I was like, yeah, I guess that was interesting, and then you kind of move on from there. So guys, that was my non-spoiler and spoiler review of Mufasa the Lion King. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Did you enjoy Mufasa the Lion King? Are you looking forward to it if you haven't seen it? And I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you have, let me know in the comments down below.